Hello guys, Xeno here and welcome back to another video on my channel. In this video I'm going to be showing you guys how to overclock your CPU in 2019. So without further ado, let's go ahead and begin this video. Now before you decide to overclock, you have to realize if your CPU can even be overclocked. Now if your CPU does have a specific suffix at the end of it, so if it has an H, K, M, Q, something like that, more than likely you will or not be able to overclock it. So if you have an H at the end of it, it means it's high performance graphics. If you have a K, that means it's unlocked, and yes, you could for sure overclock it. If it is an M, that is for mobile, and that is for only laptop CPUs, which you cannot overclock. Q is for quad core, and then S is for performance optimized lifestyle. T is for power optimized lifestyle. U is for ultra low power. You won't be able to overclock that. X is for extreme edition, and yes, you can overclock that, and Y is for extremely low power, which you cannot overclock. Now you have to pay attention to CPU degradation. Now what that is if you put too much voltage through a CPU, it'll eventually degrade. So if you were to be able to hold a 5 GHz overclock at 1.42 volts, and then a couple months later you blue screen, and that's called CPU degradation. You're not able to hold the same overclock because you put too much voltage through it. So then, for me, I have the i7-4790K. I was able to have that at 4.9 gigahertz, and it was stable. I was able to go through Cinebench and everything. And I had that at about 1.4 volts, which you should not go that high on a Haswell CPU platform. And I was not able to hold that at all anymore. I can barely even hold 4.8 gigahertz now. It's slowly degrading, and even recently at 4.7 gigahertz I actually blue screen in a game, and I'm only at about 1.38 volts is what I usually use, somewhere around there. So pay attention to how much voltage you put through a CPU, because you will degrade it pretty fast. Now for overclocking, you're going to have to make sure you have the correct motherboard. Now I have the LGA1150 socket. Most people don't have that anymore. Most people have either the AM4 sockets or the LGA1151. But I'm still on the LGA1150 platform. So for me, I will be using the Z87 motherboard or the Z97. Just make sure you do your research before you pick up a motherboard and a CPU. If you do have a motherboard that cannot overclock, don't buy a CPU that can overclock, because then you'll be wasting the complete performance of that CPU. If you have a motherboard that can overclock and a CPU that can overclock, then make sure you go ahead and do that. That will be the better deal. So make sure you do research on YouTube on what motherboard you should buy. So make sure your computer is turned off and then turn it back on. You should have specific keys to open your BIOS. It could be F1, it could be F2, it could be F3, it could be F4, it could be F5, it could be even delete as well. It should say on screen what to do to open your BIOS. For me it says press F2 or delete to open the BIOS. So go ahead and keep repeatedly clicking it to make sure it opens it up. Now the settings that we will be messing with is the CPU core ratio and the CPU core voltage. Make sure it is synced to all cores. I do not recommend having it one core go faster than the other. So right now I'm at 47, which means it's at 4.7 gigahertz. You could use the minus and plus signs to actually go up and down. It should be at auto by default, and if you click the plus, it will go all the way up to whatever frequency you want it to be at. You could try your luck and try getting 5 gigahertz, but for an i7-4790K, that is like winning the Silicon Lottery. And then go down to CPU core voltage. By default, it will be at auto, which is around 1.1 volt. For me, I prefer 1.39 volts. Don't go to 1.4 volts. You'll degrade your CPU pretty heavily like I did. You could have the extreme tweaking on if you want to. I don't see any performance gains or benchmark gains at all with it off, so it's just your choice. You could manually overclock your frequency as well if you choose to. I don't recommend you do that though, because it will increase your DRAM frequency. And for me, I can't exactly do that because I don't have the same timings on any of my RAM sticks, because I bought two of them separately from somewhere else and two separately from somewhere else as well, so they're kind of different. But they both run at the same speed. So once you're done, just click Save Changes and Exit. If you don't blue screen when you get into the lock screen, you should be fine. But it's not good to just say that. You should test it out by using either Prime 95 or Cinebench. I like using as well. I don't exactly recommend using Prime 95 though, because it can overheat your CPU so much. Even at like when my CPU was at 4 GHz, I tested with Prime 95 and the temps were at about 190 degrees Fahrenheit or about 90 C. And I have the H150i cooler, which is a 360mm 3-fan cooler with the fan pump at full speed and the fans at full speed as well. So that shows how Prime 95 is not the greatest thing to test. If something were to go wrong and your computer is not posting for some reason, you can reset the CMOS battery. Now if you have a high-end motherboard like me, I have the Asus Maximus Formula 6 motherboard that has a button on the back of it. If you have some other motherboard, more than likely it will not have a button on the back of it, and you'll have to actually physically pull the battery out. If you're unlucky like me, I have a front plate on the motherboard, so I'll have to remove the front plate just to get to the CMOS battery, which will require me to take out the GPUs that I have in my system, which is very unfortunate if you have SLI setups. You have to unplug a lot. Now if you do post, yes, you can go in the BIOS and just change your settings down to different values. But if you don't post, it's best to reset the CMOS before you do anything else. Now, if this video did help you out, make sure you go ahead and subscribe to my channel and like the video as well. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and comment that down below and I will get back to you as soon as possible.